Hi, everyone. I am Kevin Delaney. I'm the CEO of Charter, and on behalf of Charter and Stack.me, welcome to our discussion series about building a better internet. First, Stack.me is the best place for writers to earn money from their fans. You can get a free site and start publishing just by going to Stack.me. That's STCK.me. And Charter is a media and insights business focused on building workplaces for the future. You can sign up for our free newsletter at charterworks.com. So as I said, the topic of our discussion today is how to build a better internet. This is the second conversation in the series. And the specific driving question that we have is around the role of discovery and serendipity in the machine age. The dominance of search and social media algorithms mean that the web today is like an infinite house of wonders, often with just a few doors. The chance of finding or stumbling upon what is most interesting or relevant can be surprisingly small. Plus, professional public interest media has been destabilized because of its inability to compete with programmatic advertising to get sponsor revenue. The driving question is, why can we not have discovery with the quality and authenticity we expect from the old world gatekeepers and the scale we're used to in the digital age? So we're joined today by Jessica Lessin. Jessica is the founder and CEO of The Information. This is the authoritative media outlet covering Silicon Valley. Jessica was previously a top editor and reporter at the Wall Street Journal, where she and I were colleagues. I have been looking forward this whole week to this, spending some time with Jessica talking about the internet and the state of media. So Jessica, thank you for joining us here. It's great.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm excited to dive in.
So first of all, for those of among us who aren't as familiar with The Information, could you briefly describe what you and your teams do?
Absolutely. So we cover the most important stories about technology companies, technology leaders, tech power, and its influence across all of business. We have a newsroom of almost 40 journalists globally, and publish, a variety of articles, newsletters, charts, org charts, to really help business professionals understand the technology industry and how it's disrupting, everything. We've been around for about 8 years, and it's like I say, it's an understatement to say it's been an interesting time. So that's what we're up to. We're a subscription business. We believe very much and very deeply in that model. It's been a lot of momentum here in different ways that I think we'll touch upon the themes we're going to talk about.
And it's, I'll just sort of double click on your subscription business, because you started, as you said, about 8 years ago. You started this as a subscription business at a moment when a lot of the momentum and the zeitgeist was really not. So in many ways, you're the pioneer and the model for this type of media company. The other thing I would just add to what you said as a information fan is your reporting is just so unique and valuable, and is very scoop driven. So it's scoops of fact or insight sometimes that are really, I think, what people are willing to pay premium subscription prices for.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I believed in subscription 8 years ago, and I do today because I think readers and consumers are there to pay if it's worth paying for. No one needs the 19th version of a story they've read, right? When you talk about content discovery, that's not, I think, deeply where journalists should be spending their time. And when you focus on the truly original reporting, that lends itself very well to a subscription model, whether it's, just yesterday, everyone, big buzz around Netflix saying it's going to be open to advertising. Our team got inside the fact that employees were shocked in many cases by Reed Hastings kind of interrupting one of his executives on a call to say that. We have the inside reporting of how he and other executives over time have come to really blow up or recognize that they need to blow up their model. That's the kind of stuff we specialize in that I think is really valuable broadly.
I want to come back to that later, that you mentioned Netflix, because there's been some commentary about questioning whether that's Netflix stumble this week is proof of the the limitations, the ceiling for a subscription model. But I want to first by starting just ask you a more general question, which is kind of what you're most excited about in terms of the opportunities for media online and what most concerns you, I guess.
So what really excites me about the opportunities is simply that as publishers, we have this ability to be in direct contact and relationships with our readers in just completely unprecedented ways. And I started the information because I felt the news industry was reacting to the rise of technology, whether it's social media, other technologies, completely the wrong way. And that we said, okay, there are these new tech platforms. We're going to forget what we're good at and try and play the game that the tech platforms are playing. And that struck me as insane because technology, it's not like we go to play on the field of technology. Technology is everywhere and it can strengthen any business in any industry. And so I think that's really true at this moment, whether it's building communities online, how we distribute our content, new types of data and journalism. Tech is like unleashing this whole toolkit for publishers to be even better at what we're good at. And I think while that is kind of daunting in some regard because consumer behavior is changing so quickly, there's tremendous potential. I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface. And the fact that we can do that as publishers on our terms, with business models that make sense for us, with control over content that makes sense for us, that's really exciting.
I know one of the areas that you and I have talked about is something that people think as a very techie thing, but it's the CRM, the customer relationship management system, and it's not an area that digital media companies have been particularly sophisticated about. But I think it's an area you've invested in, and seen that the sort of advancements in tech have opened up opportunities for you to have a different kind of relationship and understanding of your readers, basically.
And to know them deeply, right? Absolutely. 8 years ago, we actually built our own CMS when we were launching the information. And people thought that was also a little bit crazy. WordPress was perfectly adequate. But our thinking in doing it was we wanted to build a CMS that talked to our CRM, that had this concept that if you comment on an article, for instance, that is a person, that is a subscriber, and we can learn things to serve that subscriber better. And it was sort of this loop. And so we architected our tech stack that way from the beginning. And even in the past few months, as we've relaunched different parts of our CMS and built a newsletter CMS, just sort of right one click away in the same menu is the CRM. And that is something that was very deliberate and I think is a great example of tech empowering publishers.
Yeah, and I should disclose that we have a partnership around your CMS and your CRM.
Yes,
So
Charter
is in there one click away and clicking between the CRM and the CMS. So let's shift over to the kind of headline topic. And I think, kind of where we're starting is this question of discovery. So how does content find its audience, and how do audiences find content? And at a high level, how would you describe the state of content discovery online currently? And is it broken or is it functional?
I think it's behind. I don't know if I would go as far to say broken. Maybe those things are synonymous, but it strikes me as kind of behind. And I just, and also kind of proliferating. I guess those are things. So to drill down, in some ways, I think what is working well in content discovery is basically push, right? Email. Yeah. We all our inboxes are a testament to the newsletter kind of overload, but at the same time, that is the case because it is a really powerful. It is a discovery mechanism, but it's more than discovery because we're not relying on you to think to go I'm in the mode to look this up, like we're piping it to your inbox. I was just in our edit meeting and we were talking about headline style and push notifications, right? Like that is a really very important part of publishing right now. So I think that is working well. I also personally think, everyone can complain about having too many newsletters in their inbox, but like, if you really want it, you're glad it's there. And I don't know that it's broken, right? I mean, I think it, all the data suggests from ourselves and other publishers that consumers like that. So yes, we have to think about congestion in the inbox, but I think we're in like a pretty healthy state in terms of like consumers like it and it works for the ecosystem when it comes to that. I think, if you think about the big tech platforms, Facebook, Twitter, so on, in many ways, I think we've seen a shift. I don't think of Facebook as a place you go to discover news and information anymore. I think it's a place some people go to publish things, updates, increasingly, and Facebook wants it to be like photo and video. So it's almost like there's been a shift there, which I think is probably healthy. Twitter remains, I think, for a lot of power users. I'm kind of rambling through these, but
Yeah.
I think your bigger point, like, I think it feels, it can feel crazy when you think about it in the aggregate, but I guess I see like some very specific things working very well. Specifically, I think like the email and push kind of ecosystem. And I think ultimately consumers are savvier at sorting through this than maybe we like kind of give them credit for when we're like strategizing about this in meetings, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that, I similarly am very positive about email newsletters, but also very cognizant of their limitations, which is you arrive in someone's inbox, it is, there is some friction to actually signing people up to be an email subscriber. You're using technology that actually has limitations in terms of what you can put in an email and the sort of functionality you can get in there. If you're really unlucky, you wind up in the spam folder, and if you're just sort of unlucky, you wind up in the promotions tab in email. And
different degrees of purgatory. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because in some ways it's a way around the intermediation of the platforms like Facebook or Twitter or Google, but it also, I think that there are a lot of us who would love for email to evolve or push to evolve in ways that get rid of some of those problems that we're running into. Do you have any
They probably will. I mean, if you look
hope for
back,
that?
payment used to be way more frictionless than it is. So I think the trend is in that direction. Even passwords, log in through Google, the kind of click to sign on. I think there are steps. Completely agree with the limitations. I think a lot about, for their subscribers, we will give a push notification via email for people who want it when we publish a story. A subset of our subscribers would love all of the text in there. But interestingly, we think we even have a way around some of the forwarding concerns. But I'm still reticent because the environment, like if we have charts, if we have data, the community, the comments, right, are all on the site. So I think there are limitations, but the name of the game, if you're a media company, I think, especially for the next few years, is just going to be like relevance, touch point, engagement, right? We're all brands. We represent different things to our readers. Our readers have infinite choice. They could spend all day scrolling Instagram. And what's going to keep them coming back to us is just that, like, being as top of mind as possible, as much as possible. And really, ultimately, I think the excellent content. But I think we're going to want those moments to like resurface in their mind across like as many platforms as possible. And I think email, years ago when I was still at the Wall Street Journal, I wrote a cover story saying email was dead, and man, that was stupid. I mean, it's not even close. So
That's great. We'll have to look that one up. I'm probably wrote the same story 5 years
probably.
before you as well, and made that same mistake. Yeah, no, it was. So I want to maybe we'd spend a minute on some of these other platforms,
Mhm.
and um, Facebook you mentioned, and my observation is very similar to yours, that Facebook is less and less a place that people go for news, despite Facebook having a news tab, despite them having recruiting email writers, despite them, I think, doing stuff in podcasts.
Mhm.
My sort of sense from far away is that, despite Facebook investing a significant amount of money and talking a lot about those initiatives, the net result is not that Facebook is more of a place that people have a quality news experience or go to for news today than it was a few years ago.
I'd agree, and I think the initiatives you described were probably candidly, trying to appease publishers in certain ways, but we're not, because Facebook wants to tilt overall usage of the platform towards news, right? I mean, I think it's all the company's data suggests it's not what people engage in the most. It has this tricky aspect of being perhaps polarizing, and in many cases, very can be controversial if you're talking about coverage of certain topics. So I think all the initiatives you described were sort of appeasing grumpy publishers over the years, and I think companies probably genuinely interested in thinking about business models around news and their role in that. But that's I would say a side hobby.
Yeah. No, it is interesting how they, like, every year or two, come up with some new thing to save news that, so they talk to publishers about and save news, and none of it really has gotten traction. Um, Search is another area, like in the similar vein to email newsletters in some way. Search is actually obviously like a pretty, multi-decades old kind of thing. My sense is that it's actually still pretty significant for a lot of publishers, and in some ways is more important for them, for discovery than than it was when Facebook was a significant driver of readership for them. Do you have a sense of that, for, in your own case with the information or the industry more broadly, that how you think about the role of search in content discovery right now?
It is important. It's important for us. I think it's like always been a chunk of discuss. I don't think I've seen like a meaningful shift, but it's sizable. It also, just as an aside, is in terms of our paid acquisition of subscribers, performing very well for us,
Mhm.
and that's nice too. And I
That's
think,
interesting. So when you say paid acquisition, you're basically buying Google search ads
yeah,
to gain subscribers, and that's actually working.
it is working, and it's
Yeah.
at of all the channels where we do that, it's the best performing ROI right now
Wow,
by far.
that's great.
Um, and industry wide, yeah, I was just I sit on a couple boards and a couple news investments for other small publishers, and was just in a board meeting yesterday where the topic of kind of growing search traffic and impact was a chapter of the board meeting, because it is very meaningful to the publisher. So um, yeah, I think that is the case, and Google's built something that's just an incredibly sticky engine, and in and out of Google News, and it can also be very frustrating for publishers too. I think some of the publishers who I've worked with and advised have had real trouble, getting, just sort of like, for some reason things aren't happening right. There's a lot of behind the scenes, and Google is always grappling with its policies. We published a story this week just about that, as it related to other small businesses that basically went out of business because of Google's policies that were in some case misapplied. But yeah, still very key, and I think will continue to be.
Great. I want to ask you, I'm going to take, there are a few questions here that I'm going to shift over and pull in because they're relevant to what we're talking about. But maybe we've talked about Facebook and Google now, and maybe we just spend a moment. I guess the other two big ones we could talk about are Twitter and Apple. And so, um, how would you describe the role of Twitter in content discovery? And and curious whether you think that Twitter would become a better or worse platform under Elon
Its
Musk
new
ownership.
potential overlord who's
Yeah,
miraculously found some funding.
yeah,
Um, it's an interesting one because I get, as a journalist, I use Twitter to broadcast, and everyone in my feed uses Twitter to kind of broadcast. I mean, I think there can be, to me, it serves some role in discovery, sort of as this like news wire, right? I'm an editor. I'm trying to just figure out like what's happening.
yeah,
I haven't found a way to use it in a particularly thoughtful way for discovery. I think, many people do. I mean, we know, anecdotally, subscribers will see things through Twitter all the time, and others as well. So I think for power users who, you can really get into a rhythm with it, and it can kind of be useful. But um, I also, as you're asking, I'm just sort of wondering, like, what has happened to browsing from the consumer side, right? Like, so browsing is essentially, an activity to entertain or use up some time. I don't want to say waste time, right? But
mhm,
it's a sort of passive, like,
yeah,
I'm not looking for something, I'm not doing something, I'm not watching like a particular show on Netflix, or maybe I'm doing it while I'm on, and you're just sort of, I think of that as kind of like the entertainment broadly aspect of media, which is incidentally why I named us the information, because that was the sort of duality I had in mind. But
yeah,
so I also just wonder, like, if consumers are, um, what they're looking for in those time, and frankly, they're probably looking for video, right? Which is, I think, why you're seeing TikTok and Snap and Instagram and all of that. And Twitter, yes, there's video on Twitter, but that's not like the always on open up the app kind of experience. And I think if that doesn't change, they probably will become less relevant over time. Um, I don't think Elon. So I don't think Elon is going to end up owning Twitter. And but there's also many chapters to play out. But there's just a tremendous number of questions, and I think the board, I imagine, will exhaust every other option, um, and probably be rescued by one of their existing shareholders and buying him out, would be my prediction. But I think, I don't necessarily think he'd destroy the product either. I mean, I think with his points as its power user, I think are all valid and interesting. But he's also not talking much about the business either. So
mm,
we'll see. But for platforms like Twitter, I think a few years from now, a good case will be like, are they audio on by default or audio off by default?
yeah.
And more, I think, are going to go audio on by default, which is just like fundamentally a very kind of different experience.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Twitter has been among the slowest of the platforms to really fully embrace audio and video.
Totally.
It was text in the beginning, and that's probably one of the explanations why something like Snap actually is a bigger company than Twitter at this point. Even
Absolutely.
Snap is a platform that we probably talk about less in the general culture of things. I want to go to a question in a sec, but I just want to, just to round it out, talk about Apple for a
Yeah.
second. So Apple, in a way, is on millions and millions and millions of phones around the world, and has Apple News, and has, I guess in my view, has the potential to be a force for good in content discovery, partly because they don't they're not, with like, unlike Facebook and Twitter um, and Google, their incentives are not quite as attention and advertising driven, and so they could take a different approach here. My perception is that Apple isn't particularly ambitious about its, news product and service, especially just kind of there, but it doesn't seem to be something that's particularly dynamic um, or kind of as full featured in many ways as it could be. Is that your sense as well?
It is, and I think, if you're Apple, like, news is not gonna move the needle for you,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I'm not trying to be cynical, but I think it's a good way of understanding some of the news products of these big platforms is a little bit to appease people who can create PR nightmares for them, right? And I think it's a little more genuine than that, in that leaders of these companies are genuinely interested in news, but, like, not really, right? I mean, in a sense, like, even Apple TV is kind of a side hobby to Apple at this point. It's not going to sell more iPhones.
Yeah.
And so still, it's great that I sort of agree that the product can be very useful, as many people on this call might know. I mean, they use a lot of people editors. They've actually hired a lot of editors from newspapers to curate. They have Slack channels where publications are pinging them, promote my story, promote my story. And human curation can be lovely and can be a great experience. But I haven't followed closely the fortunes of their subscription Apple News Plus product, but the fact that I, of all people in subscription news, have not followed this probably shows it's not taking the world by storm.
No.
So um, I think that's it. But we cannot. I mean, it would be hard to think of a company with more power over the news ecosystem if you think about what they're doing when it comes to ad tracking, when it comes to even some changes that are obscuring email open rates.
Mhm.
So privacy-driven changes on Apple's side, but have sweeping effects on publishers. And that's how they're coming up in the conversations I'm a part of.
That's really interesting. I'm going to take one question from the comments right now by Ravi Iyer, and then we'll shift back to some of the other topics we want to cover. His question is, do you feel any tension between important versus engaging news to cover, or in picking headlines?
So on the question of what to cover, I don't feel that tension. I think we cover big important stories, and sometimes those stories have a lot of what you might think of like buzz or sex appeal, or they're trendy. Like Elon Musk might fall into that camp, also fall into the important camp. But we also, one of our sort of strongest performers this week of a story is basically a story about like economic outlook for startups. This has had huge readership, huge engagement, driven a lot of subscribers for us. It's a very important story. I don't know, some people are finding it engaging, but you're not going to see it in the trending topics of Twitter per se. But to me, when you know your audience, important equals engaging, and that works really well. Headlines are tricky. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that they're not. Headlines have to do a lot of things. They have to convince someone to kind of stop what they're doing to read an article, and they have to tell you enough about the article that you want to read. But like, if they tell you absolutely anything, why would you read the article? So I think in general, being a subscription business also helps clarify this, because we're not trying to bait someone into just clicking on an article, right? That we want to serve and attract our subscribers. And so that does sort of narrow the territory where you're going to operate in terms of headlines, but it's still vast, and we do iterate and change headlines and think about them, and I think all publishers do.
Yeah, we're talking earlier about engagement, and I think one of the things, the importance of engagement, and when you look at the state of media today, at this point, media companies and journalists have those who've been around have, decade or more of experience with engagement, thinking about engaging audiences with journalism and UX design and other things. And in some ways, that's actually one of our superpowers, is that we've done that. We've done that long enough that we are able to hold our own and stand out in a sea of content. Um, we take maybe one more question, and then I want to ask you about some of the AI and technology that you might have alluded to before. This question is from Gangesh Varma, and the question is: in India, the concept of digital news subscriptions is fairly new. What steps would you suggest a small news organization could take to increase reader revenue and educate readers about why they should pay? And there's a second part of the question: are there any lessons when it comes to maintaining a good and sustainable relationship with your subscribers?
Absolutely. So my advice for first is to keep trying, right? So to not look at the market and say there isn't a lot that's working today and conclude it can't work. I think it's really people are paying for things, even if they're in places like India, paying lower prices or less frequently. I mean, Netflix has some subscribers, Spotify has some subscribers. So I think that is a first step. And then I would start small. I would think of some type of content or product that you can build uniquely that has a valuable audience. And I wouldn't worry if that audience is in the hundreds and thousands. I wouldn't try and develop that for the ultimate size of your ambition. I would try and develop something that can be sticky with a small group of readers who will pay for it. And that's how we started at The Information. When we had a tiny team of reporters, we essentially wrote about Google and Apple. But we wrote very good stories about Google and Apple. And, now we have one, if not the largest newsroom covering technology, period. So I would say start small and focused and look at things like engagement and growth rates versus absolute numbers to tell yourself if you're on the right track. And then I think for continuing to maintain relationships with subscribers, it's going to come back again to having exceptional content. I think things like community and events, great product are wonderful and help. But in our experience, our happiest subscribers read the most, articles. And that, more than anything else, is what determines that strength of the relationship.
Yep, that's great. There's a book, like, it's a really good point about starting small and focused, and you often want to super serve the audience that you find you're getting traction with. Andrew Chen of Andreessen Horowitz had a book that came out late last year called The Cold Start Problem, and that was one of my takeaways for how you cold start any kind of business is kind of pick a small subset of what you think your overall audience is, and do a really good job of serving them, and then you can grow from there.
It's worth really emphasizing, in part for media, because it cuts against our instincts, right? We're in the influence people, educate people, inform people business. People and volumes of people are part of that. But if you think about it, Facebook started at one college. Instagram is like started by letting you post a photo, right? I mean, these are
Yeah.
narrow things. And
Tinder was, I think, at California fraternity and sorority parties, basically.
absolutely. And so what I always say to sort of media entrepreneurs and builders is, like, you'll get to the scale, right? Like, you'll crush this opportunity and then you'll expand and expand and expand. And that's what we've done too. Today we have reporters covering media and autos and all these other areas adjacent to tech. But yeah, you kind of have to, like, turn off a little bit of your media brain to
Yeah.
get it.
We also have ego, so if we don't have 10,000, 100,000 people reading our stuff, it sort of gives
But
us.
our egos can, but if you're writing for the right people, for your audience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think, there are ways to still feel important if that's what drives
Yeah,
you.
that's a really, really, really good point. I want to ask you a bit about, since we're talking about discovery, building better internet, look forward a little bit into the the role of technology in potentially replacing some of the human curation that's
Mhm.
gone now and that happens now. And I recently saw a demo of an email automation platform called Future Scope, and it basically creates email newsletters without any human involvement. You have to kind of configure them.
Mhm.
There's an email newsletter called Future Loop by Peter Diamandis, which has, I think, over 50,000 subscribers. Do you think that the artificial intelligence can replace the human curatorial dimension of an email newsletter, of a newspaper? Do you think it will be in the future? Is that something you think about?
Going to exist alongside, right? So some people are going to want like, and maybe there's some things. I mean, there are plenty of things I just love aggregated and pumped to me so I can scan them and figure out what's happening in the world. But like, it's the same with reporting, right? Like, I mean, there's going to be tremendous demand for, I believe, humans doing deeply differentiated curation as well as reporting. Like this isn't an area that kind of feels like an either or to me. I mean, no AI is gonna like come back to, get inside like the Netflix meeting last week where they said we hadn't made a decision on advertising yet. And then their CEO is announcing it on the call, right? Or, it's just, or no AI is gonna take to task venture capitalists who were sexually harassing female founders. So,
And those are examples of reporting that your team did that had really high impact, but it's hard to imagine technology generating the same coverage.
yeah, I mean, it wouldn't, right? I mean, there's just no world where it would. But curation is an interesting middle ground. And yes, people, newsfeed has been curating in some way, news and information for a long time now. Yet people still love to hear from great newsletter writers, like Charter, right, who are curating their perspective on things. So I think it's both, but just what happens as there's more stuff is like the bar is raised in terms of quality, right? So you're it's extra important that there really is that differentiation in the reporting or the curating
Yeah.
or any of it. But I think there's going to be demand across the board. It just you really have to stand out, and I think the playing field will benefit companies that have brands that also that sort of readers and consumers have like some sort of emotional ties to as well. It's why the largest news publishers in the world, whether it's the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, or whomever, are doing quite well now in terms of their. I mean, there's that they're benefiting from that too.
Yeah, I'm just hearing, when I hear you, I want to talk about those publishers in a second, but hearing you talk about AI and how it can sit alongside human journalists, there are news organizations like the Associated Press that a bunch of years ago started experimenting with having AI write actual articles. And there's a question about whether anyone wants to read the basic earnings and announcement articles that were generated. But if there is an audience for that, it's probably a good use of AI to have these sort of cut and paste Mad Libs, sort of templated pieces, rather than wasting human reporters' time when they could be trying to get the inside story of the Netflix boardroom, or do other things as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we just have to be careful. I've read some of these stories, and they're like Franken stories, right? I mean,
Yeah,
and of course, the technology will progress, but
yeah.
you just
No,
have to
that's fair.
kind of.
So I want to go back to the point you're just making about the power of the big brands. And so there's a common view of the economics of media today, that it can support the oligopoly of these large general interest media players, like you're describing, New York Times and others. They have the scale for advertising, they have power in Google, SEO, social distribution. They have a broad enough offering to entice customers to subscribe, on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have more niche publications that like The Information or Stat News or Skift or our own charter, which can connect deeply with a narrower audience. And then that it's a bit hard for some publications in the middle, that these two poles are really where the most meaningful success and opportunity is in media. Do you share that view?
I do. I think it probably is true in many industries, like, and it gets to that like differentiation point, right? You discerning consumers with unlimited choice across the board. The middle can be like a tough place to be. I think where I sometimes bristle at the barbell or whatever is like, I don't think you can be very focused, but at huge scale these days, right? Like by covering technology, by covering the future of work, as Charter does, right? Like it doesn't, I think the audience out there that is interested in that is far greater than many people realize, which is okay because they all realize they'd all go after it. But I do, and I think it comes down to like, it's okay, it's easier, you can have a real brand if you're very focused. You can also have a real brand if you've been around for centuries, right? Like those two things really help. And the economics, they are working, and it's really, you see across the smaller, and it's the same basket of economics. It's a deep focus in subscription, supplemented by advertising, brand partnerships, which for many publishers is a huge growth area, and experimentation beyond that too. So I think being stuck in the middle will get really big. Now that will get hard. The challenge for the big publishers, because of course they have challenges, is that what happens when you get to bigger and bigger scale is you do get less differentiated, and I think your brand kind of it's harder to stand out, right? You have to find that next million subscribers by buying a word game, frankly, in the case of the New York Times, and so
or a local sports site,
and running and managing a publication that has to be everything to that many people is very tough. It's very tough in a polarized political climate. It's very tough just given a range of other disparities. And so I think that is the challenge ahead for the largest guys. And I think in terms of momentum, that's why I think there's going to be a lot more in the area where we are.
And I've read, in the coverage of the promotion of Joe Kahn to be executive editor of the New York Times this week, one of the articles about this said that he has told the New York Times staff that they need to compete more aggressively with smaller publications, including specifically your publication, The Information. And that really stood out for me, that this sort of big general news organization was actually feeling like it needed to compete more effectively with smaller, more specialist publications. What's your read of that?
Well, we're coming for you too, Joe. So thank you. But no, it goes back to what I said. You can't be all things to all people in anything. Like, you can't be a restaurant that's all things to all people. You can't be a clothing brand that's all things to all people. You can't be a news publication that's all things to all people. And what makes the information work, is we really know our audience, and we can deliver news and information that is essential to them. And again, it's a big audience. It's a growing audience. It's not yet, 5 million, 10 million, right? And so I think that's the challenge. And how do you prioritize? How do you prioritize resources? Place like the New York Times has like an AR VR studio, is throwing money at audio. You can have more resources, and you can, but you still have to make trade-offs. And it's the same, I'm a sort of longtime journalist covering the tech companies. I see it all the time, right? It's if Apple wanted to be dominant in news, which it doesn't, like, it would have to like take time away from being good at other things. And that's why, you have specialization and competition. So Yeah, I think it's also a recognition, talking about my reaction. I mean, when we started the information, tech coverage was fluffy and hypey, and everyone was saying, oh, wow, this founder's worth this much money. And we came along and we really held companies to account, and we held their businesses to account. And we've been very tough on tech. And I think that the coverage, other publications have too, the Times among them. But I think it's also a recognition of what we've long known, which is the power and significance of the subject and its influence. And I again think, we have just the experience we have in covering it. We know this world better than anyone else in terms of how to cover it and where it's going. And so I feel very, very good about our position there.
That's great. I think you should. And also, my experience in big news organizations like the Times is that these niches, the news organizations kind of look down on them. The newsrooms often look down on them. They feel they're overly specialized, and everyone is dreaming of winning their Pulitzer Prize or covering the war, things like that. And so it's really hard for them to get their most talented reporters to actually commit any amount of focus to something even as large of a niche as the technology industry
Which is great. Keep covering the White House. Go to Ukraine. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. We're going to take one more question, and then I have a last question for you, and we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes. But this question is from Karnika Kohli, and it's about your subscribers. And her question is pretty specific. So, at what point in their life cycle on the information do your subscribers tend to subscribe? And how different is their engagement pattern than other subscribers? This is kind of a fairly inside question about
it's a great question. It shows it's a very very important part of the business. So I've got so many dashboards to slice and dice this question, and I don't actually the answer is it like kind of varies, and it varies by like how they discover us, right? But we look at how many emails do you need to receive before you convert, right? How many articles have you read? What's the length of time? I would say the headline to actually be useful is that the bulk of the conversions happen in a pretty short time frame.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a long tail, and so we nurture and stay in touch with people. We also have several free newsletters that people remain very, very active readers of. But we're kind of probably in that 90-day range in terms of the vast majority of conversions.
That's great. So my last question for you is something that you referred to at the beginning, which is just the Netflix subscription shortfall that they announced this week. And a number of people have used that as a jumping off point to conclude that there's a ceiling on the market for subscriptions that is smaller than Netflix or others estimated it might be. You are, I think, one of the most prominent, expert, important thinkers on subscription businesses in US media, including because of your years covering a lot of these media companies at the Wall Street Journal also. What is your reaction to this, the analysis this week?
Yeah, so I mean, clearly in streaming video, which is a also huge cost of content business, the market isn't infinite. But let's not forget how many subscribers Netflix has, which hundreds of, like a gazillion.
Hundreds of millions, yeah.
So first of all, if you tell me that's the ceiling,
it's a pretty good ceiling.
The takeaway is still get in the business, right? To be clear. I think, so that's one thought. I also think then if you compare it to other industries, right? So in news, the New York Times is probably, they're putting a marker out there at 10 million, right? They think they can get to 10 million pretty fast. They will get to 10 million. I'm highly confident of it. Again, they may buy more Wordles, but they're going to get to 10 million because the market is it's just like we're just in the beginning in so many
Yeah.
industries. And now I think there is a different point, which is you are leaving revenue on the table if you are only a subscription business. And Netflix, which is accountable to the public markets, is at a point where public market investors expect a certain kind of growth. And as much as anything, I think the exploring of advertising or the doing it in a year or so is really more of a function of their overlords sort of demanding it. And they are leaving money on the table. I think we have to give a nice plug to, honestly, Jason Kylar, who's running Warner Media, who's long been a believer, was at Hulu before that, in kind of subscription and advertising. And I think Netflix, it has to come around to that because of where Wall Street is. But there's nothing that I've seen from that or from the shuttering of CNN Plus or of any of these other things that says anything but, there are opportunities. You got to stay differentiated. And, in many cases, explore other revenue streams because there's growth there as well.
I think that was the one nice thing that anyone has said about Jason Kylar this week with the shutting of CNN
Fair
Plus.
enough, fair enough. But I think on the dual revenue streams and the
Yeah.
ad-supported tier, it's I bet you he's feeling actually okay right now.
Yeah,
Because to have
I'm sure
Netflix
Jason is fine.
embrace that model is a real validation of it, frankly.
Yeah. No, I agree. Jessica, thank you so much. This has been great to spend this time. I really covered a lot of terrain in terms of this question of internet and today and the media and how you find readers. And actually, it's been great to hear about the great business and journalism that you've built at the information.com. So thank you really for joining us, and thanks for the great work that you and your team are doing always. I want to thank everyone for joining us. There's some great questions. I'm Kevin Delaney from Charter. We're at charterworks.com, and we're doing this in partnership with stack.me, and that's stck.me. And we hope you'll join us for future sessions. So thank you, Jessica, and hope to see you soon.
Same here. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.